All right, before I get into my report, I wanted to read you this interesting news alert I got from Stratford. And it's entitled Palestinian Territories Key Power Plant Set to Close. And it says the only power plant in the Gaza Strip is expected to shut down June 24th, which is today, after the last shipment of fuel donated by Qatar runs out, an official with Gaza's power authority said. Gaza will then depend on 140 megawatts of electricity from Israel and 20 megawatts from Egypt, a total that will only provide one-third of the electricity needed in the Gaza Strip, the official said. The newly formed unity government has been informed but has done nothing so far, he added. You know, it's funny that the only nation that even cares about the Gaza Strip, Israel, is providing them with 140 megawatts of electricity, whereas the only other Islamic nation to provide them with any energy is Egypt with 20 megawatts. Israel's giving 7 times more. You know, that goes for medical attention and hospitalization and things of that nature. It's funny to me that every time some high-ranking official from either the West Bank or Gaza needs critical medical attention, they always run to Israel for that particular medical need. And frankly, that goes for any of its neighbors, because Israel's doing the same thing for Syria and others. Many of Israel's neighbors depend upon Israel to supply them with critical life-saving devices, and also, with the Middle East being a very dry area with limited water supply, Israel is on the cutting edge of desalination, which is basically turning seawater into drinkable, potable water. So in the foreseeable future, they will be supplying much of the water that Jordan will be needing to supply their nation. And I'm sure that's going to resonate to other countries as well. But I find it funny that a country that is, or should I say really kind of a territory, that is bent upon destroying Israel now has to rely solely upon Israel for their electrical needs. Actually, it's only 1/3 right now, but I'm sure Israel, out of humanitarian reasons, will probably bump that up before the lights completely go out in the Gaza Strip. But they are now completely and solely at the mercy of Israel as to whether they will have electricity or not. You know, Israel could conceivably just turn the lights out on them, no electricity, and they'd be depending upon the 20 megawatts that Egypt is supplying. And that, for all intents and purposes, would be basically lead that area into a blackout. But I thought that was an interesting article that I wanted to bring to you. Now on to what I really wanted to bring up, and that is the ISIS. Lately I've been getting a lot of emails and comments regarding this particular group and their advancement toward Baghdad. And many seem to believe, and I think it's just misunderstanding or misinformation, that the ISIS is not only bent on taking over Baghdad, but they want to take over the whole Middle East. And some are saying, yes, this looks like to me another Psalm 83 war scenario, or whatever the case may be. This is the way it's all going to play out. And frankly, it couldn't be further from the truth. So we need to actually look into the background of how this particular situation came about. And reading from Stratford, it says, Iraq consists of 3 major groups, Shia, Sunni, and Kurds. The United States left Iraq in the hands of the Shiite-dominated government, which failed to integrate the Kurds or the Sunnis. Certainly the United States, when they left, they wanted all 3 to be incorporated, so to be one big happy family. Well, but even though each of these groups have some, if not much, of the element of their group are all Islamic, they simply can't get along. But going on with the article, it says the Kurdish strategy was to create and maintain an autonomous region. The Sunnis was to build strength in their region and wait for an opportune moment. That moment came when, after the recent election, Iraqi President Nouri al-Maliki failed to quickly form a new government and seemed intent on creating the failed government of the past. Now, of course, he's starting to reconsider his actions now in the latest information. Now that Secretary of State John Kerry is in the region, he's a little more open to the idea. The Sunnis did not so much invade as arise. taking control of Sunni areas and to some extent coordinating activities throughout the region. They did not attack the Kurdish regions or predominantly Shiite areas. Indeed, the Shia began to mobilize to resist the Sunnis. What was happening, or what has happened, is the failure of the central government and the assertion of regional power. There is no native power that can unite Iraq. No one has that strength. The assumption is the United States could hold Iraq together. Thus, the demand by some in Iraq and the United States that the United States massively intervene would make sense. As in Ukraine, it is not clear that the United States has an overriding interest in Iraq. The 2003 invasion was more than a decade ago, and whatever decisions were made then belong to historians. The Sunni uprising brings with it the risk of increased terrorism and obviously gives terrorists a base from which to conduct attacks against the United States. By that logic, the United States ought to intervene on behalf of the Kurds and Shia. The problem is that the Shia are linked to the Iranians, and while the United States and Iran are currently wrapped up in increasingly complex but promising negotiations, the focus is on interest and not friendship. The 2003 invasion was predicated on the assumption that the Shia, liberated from Saddam Hussein, would welcome the United States and allow it to reshape Iraq as it desired. It was quickly discovered, however, that the Iraqi Shia, along with their Iranian allies, had very different plans. The U.S. invasion ultimately failed to create a coherent government in Iraq and helped create the current circumstance. As much as various factions would want the United States to intervene on their behalf, the end result would be a multi-sided civil war with the United States in the center, unable to suppress the war with military means because the primary issue is a political one. So this current march across Iraq by the ISIS has really nothing to do with invading the Middle East. And frankly, I've looked at other analysis. Some people have said, well, they're heading for Jordan next and other areas and probably going to try to take over Syria or whatever. Well, the bottom line is that this massive ISIS army is really only about 10,000 strong. They're frankly vastly outnumbered by the Iraqi army as it is. And certainly it is not as powerful as the Jordanian army, which is staunchly backed by the United States and Saudi Arabia, with advanced military equipment, technology, and also intelligence. So it is very unlikely that they're going to move on Jordan in any way. In fact, in the latest military intelligence analysis, they call the ISIS, compared to Jordan's army, more of a nuisance than an existential threat. And that's basically what they would be if they were to attack Israel or whatever the case may be. They'd be more of a nuisance than they would. It's kind of like Hezbollah or Hamas. They're basically not an existential threat to Israel, but they're somewhat of a nuisance at times. But continuing on with the article, it says, when we consider Ukraine and Iraq, they are, of course, radically different, but they have a single thing in common. To the extent that the United States has any interest in the regions, it cannot act with direct force. Instead, it must act with indirect force by using the interests and hostilities of the parties on the ground to serve as the first line of containment. If the United States intervenes at all, it will do so by supporting factions that are of interest to Washington. In Iraq, it would mean applying sufficient force to prevent the annihilation of any of the country's three major groups, but not enough force to attempt to resolve the conflict. So it's highly unlikely that the United States is going to intervene in either Ukraine or Iraq. And for the most part, it's due to the staggering costs that would be involved, both politically and financially. The article goes on to say that limiting wars to those who have national interests and boots on the ground is the best way to go. In other words, we would try to finance them. That is much more cheaper than us actually putting our own troops in harm's way and also setting up an expensive battlefront. So that's where we are with this ISIS movement across the Middle East. So in summary, is this the beginning of a move toward a Psalm 83 war Well, as I told the reader, that there are many places in the Bible where a Psalm 80 war scenario is probably likely in the near future, but it will be during the tribulation period. And the three I mentioned was Zechariah 12:3, Revelation 6, verse 3 through 8, and also the Battle of Armageddon, which is in Revelation chapter 19. They all mentioned in some way at some point in time that the neighbors of Israel, the surrounding nations around Israel, would at some point attack Israel, or it implies that. But as I've said, that will all be during the tribulation period. And I believe that. I don't necessarily believe that Psalm 83 is depicting any type of war that is meant for the future. But as I've always said, if you do, that's fine. At some point in time, this is going to take place. Secondly, where is this ISIS advancement going to end? Well, right now, it's already stalled as we speak. And now many experts are saying that it's unlikely that they will be able to overtake Baghdad. It's not completely out of the question, but it looks like now that they've stalled. But frankly, I see this will probably bring about some type of negotiated end. Where in fact, if Mr. al-Maliki would have done what the United States said it to begin with, and brought in the Kurds and the Sunni like they were supposed to, and incorporated them into the government, this would have never taken place. So we'll just have to wait and see how this turns out. But don't look for it to evolve into some type of Psalm 83 scenario. Their original goal was not to set the Middle East on fire, nor to take over the Middle East, and they're certainly not going to do it with a fighting force of 10,000. So my advice to you is to try to stay away from all the sensationalism of what is predominantly on the internet these days, with these crazy different theories and conspiracies. You know, many of the sites that are on the internet or YouTube or whatever the case may be, the only thing that they're saying, frankly, that is true is that the Lord is coming soon. But they seem to try to back it up with lots of crazy sensationalism that is simply not biblical nor prophetic. So watch, and you know what you're watching or what you're seeing, because many of them are just feeding on your sense of excitement. And as always, I always like to end my messages with a call to salvation. If you have not come to the Lord at this point in your life, you need to make that decision as soon as possible. You know, the Lord is not dependent upon current events in order to determine how long you're going to live. You could die today. The rapture, the tribulation period may not even be a factor in your life. And if you were to die, where would you spend eternity? Jesus died for your sins, and through that we can have peace with God. If you have not accepted the Lord as Savior today, I would recommend that you make that decision immediately. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.